We all know that Jerry West is on the NBA logo, but my guest today, Bruce Bernstein, would be on the logo of NBA content creation. I mean, this is how big of a deal he is. Bruce is co-founder, chief content officer at Pure Hoops Media. This is a project that is exploding. A lot of big-time names in the NBA have been a part of this, and we are going to talk about this. But as far as what we're going to do here, this is going to be like a game of around the world here, to take a basketball term, where we're going to look at Bruce's life, what he's accomplished, what he's doing now, and all the stories that came with it. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. Bruce is on Twitter at Pure Hoops Bruce. And of course, go follow Pure Hoops Media. That is the Twitter handle for his big time project. Of course, Bruce, many years at ESPN, coordinating producer, NBA Tonight he worked on, The Jump, the NBA Draft. I mean, I could be here all afternoon and evening, Bruce, talking about your accomplishments, but I wanted to start here. And again, thank you so much for a couple moments of your time. If I were to say right now to you, Bruce, write an essay about your life, what would the title of it be?
Living the dream. I mean, growing up as a kid in Brockton, Massachusetts, my goal was always to be a sportscaster. And, I went to college for that. But unfortunately, it didn't really quite work out. I must not have had the right look or sound or whatever, because I don't have your voice. You've got a great voice, by the way. And kudos to you for that. But I wanted to be a sportscaster. It didn't quite work out. And after I graduated college, I tried for a couple of years, didn't work out. Then I said, you know what? I gotta be in the sports media world somehow. Why don't I see if I can become a producer? And that's kind of what ended up happening.
The other thing that has happened through this journey of yours, Bruce, is that you, from everybody that I've talked to, they have wonderful things to say about you. You have an incredible reputation in this industry based upon your niceness and your wanting to give back. And one of the things that when sort of doing my research here, is somebody who you've worked with, and Cassidy Hubbard. And she was asked about you a couple years ago, and I know that both of you worked together at ESPN. And she said, Bruce is successful because, first and foremost, he is one of the most genuine and kind people I have ever known. There's a lot of people, Bruce, in this business that aren't that way. Why did you choose to go that route?
It's just in my DNA, Brian. I mean, to me, the whole point of doing what we do is to be on a successful team. And for me, I don't have to love everybody that I work with. I would like to respect most of the people I work with. I'd like them to respect me. But as far as I'm concerned, just wanting to kind of be inclusive and be, a person that is a part of a team. And even if I'm leading the team, I want everyone to look at me as a really good teammate. And when you talk about somebody like Cassidy, I'm flattered by what she said about me. The same could absolutely be said about her. I used to tell her all the time, I said, you are one of the 10 greatest living Americans. You're impossibly nice. You're hardworking. You're a wonderful human being. And every bit of success that she's achieved, she earned it every single day, Brian. She never, ever, ever came to work not ready to give 100%. And that's just one of the many reasons that I not only respect her, but love her as a human being.
And there are many reasons as to why so many respect you as well. Another one of those would be Tim Brando. I saw a tweet that he said about you a couple years ago, where he mentioned they didn't make, this is in his words, quote, they didn't make employees better than Bruce Bernstein at ESPN, close quote. When did you feel, Bruce, that you met, let me put it this way. Who was the nicest person in the NBA as far as a player that you've ever interacted with?
Oh gosh. Well, I've worked with so many former NBA players and covered some of them in their active careers, and then ended up working with them after the fact. But, it's funny. I don't want to leave anybody out, but the guys that I've worked with that were on the San Antonio Spurs, and I'm talking about Sean Elliott, Bruce Bowen, Avery Johnson, those are some of the most fine human beings you could ever meet. They're genuine, they're humble. And much like being a successful team at ESPN, one of the reasons that they were so successful as a San Antonio Spur is for the very same reasons. devotion to the team, care about their teammates, great work ethic, always on time for meetings, always would respond to an email or a phone call. So, but again, there are so many. I mean, Tim Legler, one of the finest human beings ever, a nice person. Antonio Davis, Chris Mullen. There's just so many, and I never had a. I had a few people that I didn't like think were great human beings. I'm not mentioning their names, of course, but for the most part, NBA players, I think, to the general public, sometimes get a bad rap. They can be very intimidating. They're 6'10". They're covered with tattoos. The general public who doesn't get to know these guys looks at them almost like superhuman, or maybe just like something beyond human. And I can tell you, Bryan, NBA players, by and large, are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. And I know you have.
Yeah, and we're joined by Bruce Bernstein. You want him on your starting five when it comes to NBA content creation. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. On the topic of nice people, because how much that is a part of who you are, in the fabric of who you are, which is why I want to spend a lot of time in this conversation talking about that as it relates to you. A nice guy who I've had the opportunity and the privilege and so grateful for the chance to work with him is Chris Broussard, a man that you've worked with many of years at ESPN, Bruce. And what I noticed about him is that he really has this genuine sense of caring. And look, I'm just this nobody update anchor on his show that gets to work on it 1 or 2 days a week, but he it doesn't matter who you are, he treats you the same, and he always has a memory for anybody he meets, like, and you feel really special. Like he'll say, Bruce, you remember that time you told me this about you? To you, what was it about the opportunity to work with him that if you could like harness and put into like a trophy, like one of the Emmys behind you, that would really describe his greatness and being able to work with him?
First of all, Chris is just a grounded, centered, fully mature man. He's somebody who is a great family guy, very spiritual, very religious, very respectful for others. He has certain beliefs, but he doesn't push them. He never pushed them in my face. He was just somebody who would, his default answer when you asked him to do something was always yes. Some people, every so often you'd ask them to do things and they'd say, well, I'm not sure if I can do that. And they'd look at their phone and this and that. Chris's default answer was, I'll do my best to make it happen. And his batting average was probably about 999 when it came to those things. He also was extremely hardworking. He had great relationships with players and executives around the league. So you knew when Chris Broussard was telling you something, it wasn't just some hot take. It was based on research, knowledge, and doing the work, and just a fine man.
Speaking of relationships and those in which you have fostered over the years, Bruce, one of them was with David Stern. And you worked closely with David Stern, obviously with ESPN's coverage with the NBA draft. He's a charming public persona when he was alive, and certainly we grieve his loss. But give us a sense behind the scenes here of what he was like and the way in which you guys work together.
We started out working together on the NBA draft the first year that ESPN got the contract. So the 2003 draft was our first draft. That was the year that LeBron James was drafted. And it's funny, Tim Kiley, who's the executive producer of the TNT studio show, he was a friend of mine. He used to work at ESPN, and he had worked with David on the draft when Turner had it. Well, ESPN assigned me to basically be the producer of the commissioner. In other words, I was on a headset to the producer in the truck, but I was basically tethered to David the entire night. Now, David was a very demanding person, okay? But he was also a person where if you sort of showed him that, you were a formidable individual as well, respectfully, of course, you could be, you could get his respect. So with David, they put me in that position because they wanted somebody that was not going to be afraid to sort of say, hey, David, we need you to go out there in 10 seconds, or we need you to not go out there yet because they're in a commercial. So you might have the card in your hand ready to announce it. So we started working together, and David could be really difficult at times. But here's the thing. He always had the best of intentions. It was all about doing a good job on the draft. It was all about doing a good show for ESPN. It was always about respecting the players that were being drafted and their families. I mean, to describe what it's like working, I would be behind the scenes with him, and it was a big green room. Okay, there was a lot of people backstage behind that podium. There'd be families, there'd be executives, there'd be owners, there'd be agents, you name it. There was all kinds of people back there. It was a big party. And one of the most difficult things in that job was when, when it was time and the producer was like, is he ready? Does he have the card? I'm like, yep. All right, I need him out there in 15 seconds. So what if David is talking to, say, the president of Turner Sports in this little private conversation? I have to basically go up to him and say, David, excuse me, we need to go out there now. And you had to really kind of be very sort of hands-on and directive with him. And it's so funny. And David, I got other David Stern stories, that one of which I would definitely like to share. But I used to joke around with some of the other NBA executives that would also be working on the draft. I'd say, I'm the only person in this building that can tell David Stern what to do, and he's got to listen to me and do it, right? Which is really not true, but it kind of was true. And David was just a wonderful man. Here's a really quick David Stern story. I was at ESPN, as you mentioned, for a long time, and was made a free agent at the end of 2017. One of the first phone calls that I made after I knew I was sort of going to be out of work was I called David, and I spoke to his assistant, Linda Tossi. I said, Linda, it's Bruce. I would really appreciate it if I could come down and talk to David for a little bit. I need some big brotherly advice, and I know David is just the man to give it to me. So, she puts David on the phone. I told him the same thing. He said, yeah, come on down, work it out with Linda. Come on down. I live in Connecticut, so it was really just a train ride to Manhattan for me, and it was not a big deal. So I went down there, and I'm thinking David's going to give me maybe 30 minutes if I'm lucky. Well, he gave me like an hour and 15 minutes, and he treated me as much like a member of the family as he did just a guy that, he worked with, for 11 years. I'm incredibly grateful to have had this friendship with David. Here at Pure Hoops Media, we did the very last formal sit-down interview with David right around Halloween in 2019. Mike Wise, we went down and did it in his office. And we were at his memorial service, just an unbelievable man, misunderstood by many, but just somebody that has touched my life in ways that I will never forget, and I miss him terribly.
Yeah, I think we all do. I remember those years, the glory years. I looked at the NBA when he was in charge of it. And you brought up your entity, your project in Pure Hoops Media. And this was something that you got started after your departure from ESPN. And knowing that you're someone who sort of, for a long time, when it comes to NBA coverage, you've always sort of been in the overseeing kind of chair. How does being sort of a boss while you're at ESPN differ to the way in which you think of new ideas and put out content and oversee what you're doing at Pure Hoops Media?
One of the things that I always loved about my job at ESPN was finding young people that were good and trying to coach them up a little bit and help them improve and get better. And that's been my experience with Pure Hoops Media. A lot of our hosts are, we have a couple of people that are, fairly well known. BJ Armstrong, former Bull, Mike Wise, who wrote for the New York Times and the Washington Post and all that. But a lot of our talent is younger, up and coming people. Monica McNutt, who's now becoming a big star at ESPN. King McClure, who was a Baylor basketball star, who had a promising pro career ahead of him, except that he had a heart condition. He couldn't play pro ball. His team won the national championship this year. And King is like 24 years old, great young guy, very coachable, wonderful to work with. So, to me, it's almost kind of an extension of what I did before. The only difference being, if I make a phone call and, when I used to say, hey, it's Bruce Bernstein from ESPN, people would respond pretty quickly. Then when it became, hey, this is Bruce Bernstein with Pure Hoops Media, it's like, oh, okay, maybe they'll get back to you, maybe they won't. I was very fortunate in that a lot of the relationships that I had when I was at ESPN, I really wanted them to be personal, certainly with the members of the NBA, all the way up from Adam Silver, David Stern on down to the different teams, to, all the PR people, whatever. So I had pretty good luck with those folks returning the calls. But people who didn't know me as well, where I would reach out, you don't have that cachet of working at ESPN anymore. So you really have to be patient, and you have to give people a little time, and you have to kind of be understanding of them and say, well, they don't really know what Pure Hoops Media is. We're still young, getting started. We're going to show them. We're going to do good content, and hopefully they will return the phone calls. But I really had to learn patience. I'm not sure if that quite answered your question, but as far as content creation, a good idea, Bryan, is a good idea. If it worked well on TV, maybe it will work well in a podcast. And guess what? If it doesn't, we'll toss it out and try something else, right? That's how you get better.
I don't know why anybody would turn you down or not answer your phone call. All they have to do is look at the Emmys behind you or look at your resume. Everything that people have watched and consumed as an NBA fan, a viewer, they have seen your fingerprints on that work with all the ESPN coverage over the years. So your resume speaks for itself. And speaking of reaching out, I did some digging, Bruce, and
Uh-oh.
I noticed. No, this is good. This is good. No,
You
this
did
is
some digging.
no, this is
might
good.
not
This
be
is this is good. This is good digging. This is good digging. So I saw that you volunteered at a senior center, and you put together this group where it was like a panel where you would talk sports with them, or you would generate discussions about sports topics. What led you down that road and set the scene for us in that realm?
Back in 2009, when ESPN had its 30th anniversary, our former president, George Bodenheimer, who was one of the great men that I've ever been exposed to in my entire career, put out an initiative for the employees of the company. He said, we want 30,000 volunteer hours for our 30 years of ESPN. And I thought, well, I'm getting on board with this. I got to figure out exactly what. But one of the things that I've always really been appreciative of is the older folks. I've always felt like senior citizens kind of get can I swear on this podcast?
Of course.
Okay. They get the shit end of the stick a lot of times. They end up being shunted to the side. Sometimes when people reach a certain age and they're past their working years, people look at them and just kind of look at them and say, you're not relevant anymore. You don't really matter so much to me. But that always bothered me, because we're all going to get old, hopefully someday. And I always loved the seniors, and I loved the old guys and the old ladies, old women, because they have great stories. So I reached out to the senior, the Hebrew Home for the Aged in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I asked them, I would love to volunteer. I'm not sure exactly what I could do, but one of the things that I think would be fun is if I came, once a month and did a sports discussion group, and just talked about sports with the guys. I'll stay away from politics. I'll stay away from religion. But everybody, if there's some folks that like sports, I would love to come. So I started doing that in 2009. And, we had to put a hold on it last year because of the COVID, because there was a lot of restrictions. But I'm fully intending to resume it once the vaccinations are far and wide enough where they want me to come back. Because to me, it's like, I want those people to know that somebody cares about them, that somebody does consider them valuable. And I've heard some wonderful stories from these old people. I'll tell you, Bryan, these folks, some of what they went through in their lives as far as serving in the military in World War II, Korea, whatever, they're way better people than I could ever be. And I just want to feel like I'm engaged with them somehow. It enhances me to feel like, I'm still getting something from that relationship.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait to hear you getting that opportunity to return to having those dialogues and conversations with them. Our guest is Bruce Bernstein. Check out all of his work at Pure Hoops Media, and obviously that's on Twitter. You can follow him. Please do that. And go download the podcast. There's so many different podcasts, the different styles, different hosts. So a lot of great content that Bruce has pushing out there. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. And speaking of someone who is valuable, Dick Vitale, and someone who we have admired over ESPN's vast amount of platforms for so many years. And there's a conversation that you had with Dick, and during the Jimmy V days when, he made that very inspiring speech. And I want, if you could, to backtrack to experiencing that and what that was like.
Okay, so I was at ESPN from 1982 to 1990. And then I was in New York for a while doing different things. And then I was ready to come back to ESPN in 1993. So before I came back to ESPN, Vince Doria, who was one of the senior vice presidents of news back then, it was the very first ESPY Awards coming up. And he called me up and he said, I'd like you to produce the ESPY pregame show. Because I was living in New York at the time. So I was like, great, love to. That sounds like fun. So I was there producing the pregame show for the very first ESPY Awards in 1993. My hosts for that were Robin Roberts, who everybody knows, and Chris Berman, who everybody knows. So we're in the afternoon, we're rehearsing the show, going through our scripts, whatever. And they were also doing rehearsals, in a different area for the show that night. So Dick Vitale, who I had known for years at ESPN, came up to me and he said, Bruce, I don't think Jimmy V is going to be able to make it up the steps to the podium for his speech. He said, you have to talk to somebody. I said, well, okay. I knew the producer of the ESPYs. That wasn't me. I was doing the pregame show, but the producer of the big ESPY show was a fellow by the name of Ed Griles, who had produced Emmys and Oscars and all these different shows. So it was an award. So Ed and I were obviously interacting because of the pregame show. So I went up to Ed. I said, Ed, Dick Vitale just told me that Jimmy V is really having trouble and he probably isn't going to be able to make it up the steps to give his speech. And that's when the idea was, kind of hatched to have Dick and Coach K escort Jimmy V up to the podium to do the speech. And then when the speech was over, escort him back down. Now, part of my job that night in producing the pregame show, back then there was such a thing as like syndication, right? I don't know how that still worked, but they wanted to do the ESPYs and sell it to stations. So it had to be cut down to a 1-hour show in the edit truck. So that was also part of my job that night, was to cut the show down for syndication. So I watched that speech probably 10 times, okay? And every time I watched it, just tears running down my cheeks. I'm sitting in the edit truck looking for, in cues and out cues for the show. We didn't interrupt that, that's for sure. But it was one of the most emotional things ever. And, because of Dick talking to me and because of me talking to Ed, that's how the idea to have Coach K and Dick escort Jimmy V up and escort him back down came about. So that was Dickie V taking care of his boy, Jimmy V.
Bruce, if you yourself were to make a speech that was highlighting the biggest obstacles and challenges that you've overcome, what would those be?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, look, I always felt like whatever I did, I was going to get as far as I deserved to get. Okay. I was going to work hard. I was going to try and treat people right. Things didn't always go my way. I mean, look, things, even in recent years didn't go my way. But the one thing I would say is I was never, ever bitter about anybody else's success. And I was never bitter about anything that didn't go my way, because quite honestly, plenty of things went my way. As far as obstacles, I don't know that they're really, anything that I would single out. But I would just say that, for people that are coming up in the business or kind of getting started, it's a lot different now than it was 40 years ago when I got started in the business. It's tougher now, I think, in a lot of ways. So what I would just say to people is, don't let the obstacles get you down. If something pops up that causes you to, have to take a step back, just figure out what you need to do or figure out what you did wrong and just try and correct it. But don't go at it with bitterness. Go at it with sort of joy. And I guess it's kind of a cliche, but always look at the glass as being half full, because honestly, we all tend to bitch and moan about the things that don't go our way. And we almost never give thanks for the blessings that we have enjoyed. So that for me is just kind of be sort of a happy warrior, work hard, be intense when you need to be, but also, don't be a jerk.
There is not an ounce of bitterness. In no way is Bill Walton a jerk. And this is someone who you've gotten to know well, you've had over for dinner. And what I love about Bill is that whenever I turn him on for a basketball broadcast, I learn something that has nothing related to basketball, something from medieval history or from the Revolutionary War or whatever it is. So, what did you learn that you recall from having a meal with Bill that was unrelated to basketball that he shared with you, if you can recall?
Bill is just a pure soul. Okay. You don't have to agree with everything that Bill says. Sometimes it's hard to even understand what Bill's even saying. Okay. But he is a pure soul. He is a wonderful human being. His wife, Lori, is an absolute goddess. She's an angel. He's a kind, kind person. What did I learn from being around Bill and being exposed to Bill? Kind of some of the stuff that I just said a few minutes ago. Live your life with joy, be grateful for your blessings. Here's a guy who's had probably close to 36 major surgeries in his life. A number of years ago, I mean, he had this terrible spinal condition, and he was basically laying on the floor of his living room on his stomach for months and months and months, and then eventually found a surgeon that helped, get him right again. But Bill, even in the depths of despair, would always treat people wonderfully. And certainly he is very reverent about Coach Wooden. Some of the stories about Coach Wooden are just amazing. And just, his teammates, he always loved his teammates. And these are sort of some of the things that I guess I kind of knew them already, but we were sort of kindred spirits, I guess, in a lot of ways. And he and Lori were at my house for Thanksgiving a couple of years because he would work, I always had this thing like because I used to have to schedule the talent, right? The basketball talent. And a lot of times it wasn't fun. Like when I said, well, I need you here for Christmas or I need you here for Thanksgiving. So Christmas wasn't as bad because that was such a big NBA day. I think, they kind of understood that. But Thanksgiving was sort of a different animal, right? It's like November, the season's like 3-4 weeks old. So I always said, with, whoever was working, Thanksgiving, if they wanted to come to my house for dinner, because we'd always have Thanksgiving with my family, they were invited. And when Bill and Lori came to dinner, oh God, what a party that was. My kids' friends would somehow or another magically show up, say, hey, what's going on? And Bill was just such a humble guy. One of our friends had a son who went to the University of Arizona. Okay. Here in West Hartford, Connecticut, that's not all that common, right? But they did. So the kid came over and, Bill, Bill was talking to him and Bill said, where do you go to college? And he said, I go to University of Arizona. And Bill goes, well, I have a son that went to the University of Arizona. It's like, yeah, no kidding. We all know that Luke went to the University of Arizona, but the way he said it, it wasn't in any sort of like, it was sort of like to connect. And that's kind of how Bill is as a person. He connects with everybody and it treats everybody just with great warmth.
Our guest is Bruce Bernstein. He is a proud Syracuse Orange. Of course, they went on to the Sweet 16. I was thinking they might go a little bit farther, but I got to admit, that was a pretty fun run in this latest NCAA tournament. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. What would you consider, Bruce, at the height of your career at ESPN, the most fulfilling event project you worked on?
Well, being a part of the NBA project was something that I just always wanted to do. But the pinnacle of that was in 2008 when the Celtics beat the Lakers in the finals. And again, I'm a Celtics fan, not a Laker hater. Okay, not gloating. I have several good friends that are former Lakers. Kurt Rambis, his wife Linda. These are some very good friends of mine. But in the moment where they were about to win, I had to go. I was overseeing SportsCenter's coverage, right? But because we all knew that game was over at halftime, game 6. I mean, it was like the entire second half was just nonstop partying for Celtics fans as they watched the Lakers just like not get anything done against Boston. So my, I didn't have to be in the truck right away after the game because ABC was on the air and they were going to be on the air for a while, right? So what we discussed was everybody knew that the big three was going to be interviewed on the court, but the other two, as they were called, Kendrick Perkins and Rajon Rondo, we wanted to do what we call live to tapes with them, where we'd go out with a camera, with a reporter and a ENG crew and shoot like minute and a half, 2 minutes live to tapes and feed them back to the truck. So I happened to, my job was to get Mike Tirico, who was doing the game for ESPN radio at the time. We were going to meet a camera crew. And as soon as we were able to get out on the court, we were going to go out on the court and get Perk and get Rondo. So I was standing basically behind Mike as he finished up the game. And as the clock is winding down, here comes Paul Pierce coming after Doc Rivers with that Gatorade, throws it on him. That was like Paul told me that was the first time anyone ever did an indoor Gatorade bath. So I'm standing there waiting. But here's the part, it was almost my first NBA rebound, Brian. I swear to God. Here's what happened. The clock's winding down. Glenn Big Baby Davis has the ball. As the clock winds down, he just tosses it straight up in the air, okay? And it takes this gigantic bounce, and it's coming right down to me. I can see it. I'm going to catch this ball, right? It's I swear to God, it's come. But standing about 2 feet away from me was Cedric Maxwell, the former Celtic player, used to be called Cornbread, was a Celtics analyst on the radio, wearing like one of these like yellow rain slickers like we used to wear to school when we go out. So I'm waiting. Here comes the ball. Max just he's like 6'8", sticks his big mitt out, grabs the ball. I didn't get it. It was going to be my first rebound. It wasn't. And he's like jumping up and down like a little kid. I got the ball. I got the effing ball. Okay. I know I can swear. I didn't want to go there. And I'm like, and it was just a moment that's frozen in my mind. And that picture that, a lot of people have seen, I'm in that picture. If you go to my Facebook page or Twitter or whatever, you'll see it. And it was just, that was like the greatest moment for me. I was right there when it happened. And as a Celtics fan, I went to my first Celtics game in 1966. Okay. Bill Russell was still playing. I was just a kid then. That to me is a moment I'll never, ever forget. And thank God that picture will live forever. So my kids, I can prove to them, hey, I actually did something once.
So often when sports media people work in the business, they accumulate years. They become desensitized to what excites fans, like these big moments and being on the court or being near all the action. But it seems that while you were able to ingratiate yourself to a thriving and continuing to be thriving career in the business, that you still had that little child fanboy aspect of you, which I find that. How do you feel like that came out most on top of that experience with the Celtics over your career?
Just the pure joy of being able to do this. I mean, look, I'm not, I still have those moments. I mean, I don't ask, when I asked Paul Pierce to sign that picture when we're working together, that was kind of different. I mean, I don't really ask for autographs and stuff like that. But to me, to be able to sit, in a room or on the set or in the control room or in a meeting room with some of these people that I just had so much respect for. And again, not just, the former players, but really some of the on-air people. I mean, Stephen A. Smith. I love Stephen A. Smith. He's one of the nicest people. Okay. He treats everybody great. He's another guy who might be misunderstood a lot of times because people see him on TV and he's arguing with Max Kellerman or he's, talking kind of loud or whatever. If you had a conversation, Brian, with Stephen A. Smith, you'd barely be able to hear him because he'd be kind of talking like this because that's the person he is. He's got a wonderful on-air persona, but he's just a wonderful human being and a great pal, somebody I just incredibly fond of. So my fanboyishness, if you will, is just to be able to be in that family, whether it was the ESPN family, now it's the Pure Hoops family, the NBA family is super important. And I'm just grateful for so many things, Brian. I mean, and the blessings of being able to do what we've done for all these years. And you have a sense of it too. I mean, you're doing a lot of these same things right now in your own career. It's just sometimes you almost like can't even believe it.
Yeah, well said. Two quick questions for you. Bruce Bernstein is with us. Such an honor to have him here. I'm Bryan Fenley. And you bring up Stephen A. And I don't know how many people realize this, but before he exploded at ESPN, he used to have a show at Fox Sports Radio. And he, from there, would then transition to ESPN, obviously. But I knew somebody that was a producer on his show at FSR and said that Stephen was like one of the most humble guys out there, was always asking for critiques. How did I do? Was that segment okay? Like, was that interview okay? Like, he was so open and such a team player, and never a know-it-all, which I love learning these stories because we never really get to see what these people are like when they're off camera, and when they're real and they're authentic. It just makes them, you want to root for them even more. Quickly, did you ever come across, I'm going to go with a yes here, Mark Kestisher with ESPN Radio? He
Love
he he
Kesty.
was he was one of the nicest guys I ever met. He took a couple moments of his time to have like a lunch with me, and I would love to hear a Mark Kestisher story if you do, because the guy, I'm so happy for his success, but also it couldn't be happening to a nicer man.
Kesty's a real one, Bryan. I mean, he's as real as they get. All right, here's my Mark Kestisher story. When it was the All-Star game in 2006 or 7, it was in Houston. Okay, I'm not sure what year. It was either 06 or 07. And you know, the ESPN radio guys were always working on a less of a budget, let's say, than the TV people. We had more money, so we would rent cars. They would take cabs, you know, stuff like that. So we were both on the same flight, and we didn't really know each other that well. We kind of knew each other casually. So, you know, we both had the same flight, and it was a really early morning flight. It was probably like a 6 a.m. flight. So we had to leave the hotel probably at like 4:30 in the morning. So I said, you know, Kesty, you know, I got a car. Do you want to ride to the airport? You don't have to take a cab. He's there. Oh yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Bruce. So we get in the car, and we're coming up to like a toll gate, okay, a toll plaza, the kind where, you know, the arm swings down, you know, and then it swings up. So again, it was really early in the morning, and we're driving up to this toll gate, and I'm not really slowing down, even though this thing is down. And Kesty's like, Bruce. We were going to basically like tear this toll gate down. I'm like, oh, Kesty, thank you so much. He probably saved both of our lives, not to mention a lawsuit. Kesty actually did one of our podcasts over the summer when he was in the bubble. He did the Mike Wise show. And, you know, Kesty was just, you know, he was telling us great stories back when he used to do the Albany Patroons in the CBA before he made it to ESPN Radio. And we both are really good friends with George Karl. So he would tell me about how, yeah, George used to take us out to dinner day of the games, but the caveat was he would always pay, but he always was the one to order. So Kesty's like, you know, working some local radio thing in Albany, right? So he was thinking like, well, I'm getting a free lunch, whatever. And he's there, George used to order all this crazy stuff. And I really had to learn how to eat things that I never had eaten before, because, you know, George was paying. And I was like, okay, George, go for it. He said George used to buy him ties and socks and stuff, just like, you know, but that's how George is. I mean, George was another one who had been at our house for Thanksgiving one time. Actually, one of the years, I had Amin El Hassan and George at the house for Thanksgiving. That was fun because George is a super, super good guy. Again, another one, his book was called Furious George, right? And when people used to watch him coach, they'd think this guy's a maniac. He's nuts, right? But he's also just one of the most, I mean, he's very, very liberal politically. He will tell you that himself. Sure. But he's just he cares about the world. He doesn't just care about himself. And just so it's funny that, you know, Kesty and I both happen to be good friends with George. And Kesty, I know I took you off the track a little bit there. Kesty is just such a great human being. And again, you and he have two of the best voices I've ever heard. You
Oh,
guys both got it all going
stop
on.
it.
Ah, it's true, Bryan. Don't be humble, man. It's true.
Oh.
You want to do a podcast?
I am always here to help you. If I can ever help, I would be honored. I would be very grateful. Here's a fun question to end with here, Bruce. If you were to compare your personality, if you were to compare your personality, how you conduct your life professionally and personally, to the personality of an NBA player over all the years in which you've covered, which personality is the same or as close as you can think to Bruce Bernstein's?
I don't know that I can pick a person, but I can say this. I'm a pass first point guard. Okay. I want to set you up for success. I don't really care if I score all the buckets. I want our team to win. I want you to be, I kind of look at LeBron James that way, although in no way am I saying I'm like LeBron James. LeBron James to me is like, I put him at the very, very top of all-time great players, in front of Michael Jordan, ahead of Michael Jordan. But LeBron, one of the things I've always admired about LeBron, he cares about the world. He cares about helping people. He cares about his teammates. All right. He was sometimes to a fault, called, well, he should shoot more. He shouldn't pass so much. But he wanted Shane Battier to get buckets in Miami, because if Shane Battier became a threat, the team was going to be better. And that's kind of how I look at things. I want to empower people around me. I don't really care about the credit. It's nice when it comes. It's flattering to have Bryan Fenley invite me on his podcast. That feels very, very good. But in general, it's like the fame can go to other people. I want the team to win. So to me, I'm a pass first point guard.
There needs to be more Bruce Bernsteins in this business, but the fact that there is one means that we are blessed to have him. And the amount of work you have done, the success you have had, it could not have happened to a nicer guy, and somebody who not only has that hard work, but also has that caringness. And I could tell before we had even met, Bruce, that you were a guy that liked to dish the rock and set up the teammate and let them dunk it. You wouldn't be on the, you can be on the receiving end of the alley-oop, but you're just as satisfied, just as thrilled to set up the teammate to make the slam dunk, as you were talking about. And that's why I look up to you. That's why you are a mentor for so many. And that's why you've had such, and continue to have such, a fulfilling career, an inspiring career. Bruce Bernstein. Follow Bruce on Twitter. First of all, you got to follow his personal account. It's Pure Hoops Bruce. And then you got to follow his project, Pure Hoops Media. That's one word, all on the Twitter handle, purehoopsmedia.com. Go check out all the great content. There's some neat stuff. Bruce was talking about some really awesome, interesting guests, the Mike Wise Show. Others have worked on different shows within the umbrella of Pure Hoops Media. I'm Bryan Fenley. I don't know how I got a couple minutes of your time, Bruce. I'm so grateful for you. Appreciate you. And thanks for making this happen.
Bryan, you're doing a wonderful job with your podcast, and you've had some really great guests, many of whom are my friends, and I'm honored to join their company. And like I said, if I could have your voice, that would fulfill my life. You have a great sound to you, and continued success to you as well.
If I only had 1% of your knowledge, maybe I'd get somewhere. Bruce, thanks so much again.
Take care, Bryan. Thank you.